Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
9 minutes after 11. There are two stories from the European Union that are actually quite interesting, but I'm going to do something that we all need to do more of moving forward. I need to understand them a bit better before we discuss them. There are speed limits, as you know, on roads across Europe, but they're fairly meaningless given that all of our cars are capable of crashing through them whenever they should so please. So they're minded to introduce new technology that would see breathalyzers installed in cars and a sort of override system coming in to slow down cars that are in a precarious position. But I don't understand enough about it, not because I'm not a petrol head, but because I'm not a knee-jerk merchant. I need to understand it more. Seems to me like a really good idea. But I also know that if I was a lazy libertarian, quotes, libertarian, brackets, someone who doesn't like sharing or thinking, close brackets, then I'd probably be banging on about the nanny state today. So I'll just run through the things we won't be talking about. Same with the copyright thing, which I don't really understand either. The web giants celebrating, apparently, because, or rather the newspapers celebrating, because websites might have to pay for content that they use. I think these are things we need to have a proper look at when perhaps we're a little less distracted by the madness of Brexit. So the other story I like is the one that is still here from yesterday. We didn't have as much time as I would have liked to talk about it yesterday, involving children in social housing flats being banned from a play area set aside for rich neighbours. We may get onto that momentarily, but I think the story I'd most like to discuss is twofold. There is a state of emergency now in New York State. It's a state of emergency caused by an epidemic of measles. Until relatively recently in human history, diseases such as measles were the biggest killers of our species, the biggest killers of humans. These epidemics could take hold and sweep through a population. Scientists then developed vaccines, which massively increase our resistance to these diseases. I was a kid when smallpox got finally, what's the word, extinguished? I think I was. Do you remember stories when you were a kid, when everyone around you, all the grown-ups are greeting it as being really important and you don't really understand what it means? Especially because if you were anything like me as a kid, you'd have heard the word smallpox and thought that it was related to chickenpox. And therefore, what's everyone getting so worried about? Chickenpox was cool. I got a fortnight off school and some really manly scars. But I remember as a kid when there was a kind of sense of celebration from the grown-ups, I think, when it was reported that smallpox had been eradicated, not extinguished. Well, don't give each other thumbs-ups for getting it right. Say it in my ear so I don't keep using the wrong word, you... Honestly, just can't get the staff these days. 12 minutes after 11 is the time. And something really odd happened about 20 years ago. It was prompted, as you know, by an article in the medical journal The Lancet, subsequently utterly disowned, and written by a man called Andrew Wakefield, claiming a link between the MMR vaccine, measles, mumps and rubella, and autism. This was inflated, almost inevitably, by Paul Dacre, the then editor of the Daily Mail, and took hold of the population in a way that prompted many parents to eschew the MMR vaccine and so massively compromise what is called herd immunity. Because even if I vaccinate my child, if my child comes into contact with unvaccinated children, then, you know, the chances of that virus being contracted, although slimmed by the vaccine, are there again when they wouldn't have been if we'd all been vaccinated. I don't know Rockland County. Hopefully someone listening to the programme does. How does a town or a community become a hotbed of anti-vaccine propaganda? Because it would appear that with 153 cases confirmed, the burghers of Rockland County have elected to bar unvaccinated children from public spaces. Just have a little think about that. There'd be a $500 fine and up to 6 months in prison for any parents, presumably, violating that order. You're not going to lock up the kids, are you? And it's the parents I want to talk about. We've seen outbreaks of the disease in Washington, California, Texas, and Illinois. And Donald Trump, I think, you almost don't even have to check. Presumably Donald Trump has done something on the wrong side of this argument, hasn't he? You kind of just have to presume so, not least because so much of the anti-vaccine online activity has been traced back to, yep, you guessed it, Russia. So, is it possible to muster up some sympathy for the parents who have done this, is my question to you? Because I think in the olden days I'd have sat here and just launched into a castigation of them for their ignorance and their dangerous conduct. But, you know, again, as with the discovery, the biggest discovery I've made politically in the last couple of years or so, if someone whispers in your ear that you're under threat, half of us will go and check and half of us won't. The half that don't go and check will react to the threat, regardless of whether it's real or not. And I don't mean this to be patronising. I'm not sure our species would have survived if it wasn't for that evolutionary development. I think that our herd, our population, needs both reactions. You need people who, if you like, shoot first and ask questions later. The danger, of course, lies in how much power we give to the men doing the whispering, the ones saying, breaking point. You know, that they're the really dangerous people. Because, of course, if you whisper into the right ear, breaking point, then the owners of that ear may go out and commit murders and assassinations. Say, they're coming to take your jobs. You see, I'm not going to check. I'm going to act as if they are. I'm going to protect myself from this threat, whether it's Mexican rapists and migrants in America or whether it's Syrian refugees in this country, or whether it's an injection that will make your children poorly. I'm not going to check. It's like a belief that doesn't need to be built from the ground up. It arrives in your consciousness, fully formed and fully constructed. And listen, I'm doing my very best to be kind and charitable. I despise the phenomenon that I'm describing, and the ease with which despising a phenomenon can leach into despising people is something that good humans should resist, you know. Hate the sin, love the sinner is the doctrine that my religion would apply to this sort of observation. But when the outbreaks begin to unfold, when a steady drop in vaccination rates has been plotted, whether due to philosophical or religious reasons, or more likely because misleading information that vaccines cause autism in children has gone around the world before the truth has got its trousers on, I want to have a go today at two things. I'd like to try to not sympathise, because you have to have your children vaccinated, you know. Vaccines do not cause autism. They do stop death, unnecessary, avoidable death. So try to help me with that if you can. And secondly, do you know anyone who hasn't done it? I kind of not sure we can. I'll talk to you by all means if you've seen the error of your ways, but I can't really allow anyone on the programme trying to argue that wrong is right. I can't allow my programme to be used to disseminate myths and misinformation that can kill children. You understand that, don't you? Good. But if you've either come out the other end of this odd process, or, and this might be really interesting, if you know someone that hasn't vaccinated their children, tell me what you did, because you can never see them again, right? It's so dangerous, so hazardous, so irresponsible. But what do you do if it's your sister, your sister's kids? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. Remember, I can't allow you to come on the radio and perpetrate propaganda that could lead to the deaths of children. So do not ring me if you are a, quote, anti-vaxxer, or, to use a synonym for that, a complete imbecile. It is, I forgot the second bit of the story today. There's a county in New York State that has declared a measles outbreak emergency, 153 cases confirmed. The inevitable upshot of a decline in the number of parents having their children vaccinated. The BBC, in characteristically diplomatic fashion, says objecting for philosophical or religious reasons, or because they believe misleading information that vaccines cause autism in children. There aren't any philosophical or religious reasons. It's the wrong phrase to use, isn't it? It's like when you're talking about homosexuality and you have to... yeah, you're going to laugh at me now, but people still make this argument. You have to respect the belief that homosexuality doesn't exist, which makes as much sense as respecting the belief that cats don't exist. Actually, speaking of cats, have you ever heard of a cat cafe? I was with the well-known author Elizabeth Day yesterday, and she told me that she'd been in South Korea at a cat cafe, and I thought she was joking. And I thought it was actually quite a poor joke, you know. And then she showed me pictures. You go to a cafe in South Korea, and apparently in Japan as well, and it's just full of cats. Because the areas, the urban areas are so built up, it's very hard to have a pet of your own. Did you know this? Anyway, we digress. There's one in London. Shut up. 23 minutes after 11 is the time. Let's get back to the vaccines. Katie is in Whitney. Katie, hello.
Hello.
What can you tell us?
So this is a really difficult subject for me.
I'm
spent
sorry.
the last 10 years in academia developing vaccines for diseases like malaria and Ebola, and travelling to sub-Saharan Africa and, you know, seeing the impact of vaccine-preventable diseases.
Gosh.
But my daughter's best friend is from a family who don't believe in vaccinating their kids. They're homeschooled. They're homeschooled, and their opinion is that because their kids don't mix with other kids, they don't need to be vaccinated.
I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm no Sherlock Holmes, but I would suggest that if this child is your daughter's best friend, then they have at some point in the not-too-distant past mixed.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so their children do mix with others.
Yeah, they mix with other homeschool kids as well, but
Right.
there's just this kind of...
I understand the
prevailing dogma that's
tension.
not necessary.
I understand the tension in your voice, because this is utterly bonkers, and yet it's your lived experience.
It is. And the youngest child, I think last Christmas, contracted whooping cough, and fortunately was not particularly, you know, life-threateningly ill with it. But,
Right.
you know, that could have been measles. It could have had all kinds of consequences, and it's just a really hard discussion to have with people that you know personally, who are otherwise very sensible, very intelligent, you know, completely rational people. And I just don't know where to start. I don't believe in compulsory vaccination.
They're clear, you don't?
No.
Oh, well, then, I mean, my default position is to defer to expertise like yours, so I need to know why. Why don't you?
Well, when I say, you know, compulsory, I mean, I don't think we should sort of go down the road that other countries have done where you can't send your kids to school unless they're vaccinated, for example. You know, I mean, obviously...
Well, how else are you going to do it? I mean, you've described your
Because-
friends in fairly... comprehensible terms. I can't conceive of any circumstances. Look, if they're best friends with someone who works in immunology... Go on, sorry.
But we all know that vaccines work, right? So that's not up for discussion. So if people are choosing not to vaccinate their kids, then people like me, public health staff, government officials, school nurses, GPs, we're failing to educate people properly. And the reality is, if you Google vaccine safety, there is much, much more information out there about why vaccines are bad than why vaccines are good. And there is a lot of very good information out there, but it's just not getting through. So we're failing to make people understand why they should vaccinate their kids.
I really don't want to argue with you because you do it for a living and I'm just a gob on a stick. But we can wait until the information does the job that it's designed to do. The acreage of disinformation that's out there now, more than at any other point in human history, suggests to me that you're being, let's be kind and say, over-optimistic. But until the information...
Yeah.
Hang on, I'm trying to be diplomatic. It doesn't sit easily. until the information does the job that it's designed to do, won't somebody think of the children? And most obviously I'm thinking of a Jehovah's Witness parent who would, if they were permitted to, prevent their child from having a transplant or a blood transfusion, and they're entitled to make that decision for themselves once they've reached their majority, but they can't inflict that, in my view, madness on their children.
Yeah, and I mean, there's two ways to look at it, though. I mean, one of the key reasons that I think vaccine coverage rates are falling is that actually vaccines have done a really, really good job. And if you say to someone, you know, I want to take your newborn baby and vaccinate it against diphtheria, tetanus and polio, those are diseases that most people will never have seen, thank God.
Yes.
And if you take measles, mumps and rubella, most people... you know, certainly the younger generation will never know anyone who's had any of those diseases. Now, when I was a kid...
Well, they will in New York State, won't they?
Well, but this is the whole point. So when I was a kid, I had mumps. You know, we knew kids that went blind from mumps, who had brain damage from things like measles, who became infertile because of mumps. Those not scare stories, but those examples of why vaccines are so important aren't around now.
Oh, that's a
because
strong
there
play.
are
No,
very
of course.
low.
Yes, you don't spend your time shouting alarm, alarm if the threat has been largely dissipated or even close to eradicated, and then so people are only going to feel alarm when the problem comes back. That's probably accurate,
Which is exactly
but it's
what's
bonkers,
happening.
isn't it?
I know it is madness, and it's one of the reasons why vaccines are so successful. They're almost a victim of their own success. And I think the more we see these outbreaks and the more people start to understand that measles is a very, very serious illness with some very serious long-term consequences for the health of their child, like blindness, like brain damage.
Yeah.
Same with rubella, the risk to unborn children is real. Then maybe people will just...
Maybe. So briefly, because I don't want to... How do you... Is there going to come a point where your daughter is not allowed to see her best friend anymore?
Well, my daughter's fine. She's vaccinated. She's not at risk.
Is she not at risk at all?
Well, the measles vaccine is highly effective.
It is it? So the people in Hudson, in Rockland County, these 153 cases will, in your professional opinion, probably involve only children who haven't been vaccinated. Why then do they need? But then why do they need to ban them from public spaces? I mean,
because not everybody can be vaccinated. So some people, and also if you have a suppressed immune system, if you're having treatment for cancer, children under the age of 1 who haven't had their full course of vaccinations yet and so don't have full protection, the elderly, anybody with a chronic long-term immune condition,
I understand.
They are at risk.
Okay, and finally, how cross do you get with your daughter's friend's mum?
I try very hard to, be a patient voice of reason.
Well, it's not working.
I know.
You're a good person, Katie. Thank you. And I mean, for the work that you do, actually, it must be odd to be dedicating your life to seeking to prevent terrible, terrible diseases and deaths, and then to send your daughter off on a Saturday morning to go and play with somebody who's laughing in your face.
Well... Yeah, I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't say she's laughing in my face.
Well, it's, me, I'm given to hyperbole and a figure of speech, but from the outside looking in, I wonder what she says about you when you're not there. And I'm going to be evil. No, I'm going to be completely evil now and leave you with that thought as we cross to Simon Conway for the headlines. You live and learn. What do you think we're getting messages about at a rate of knots into the studio? There's one in Shoreditch, James, needless to say. We have 2 lovely ones here in Newcastle, James. Also a dog one called Dog and Scone. Anyone? Beulah? Anyone? There's one in sunny Tunbridge, Kent, says Kate. Piero gets in touch to tell us that there's one in Manchester, just in case you happen to be in the area. He kindly provides the website address. You're a bit late to the party on this one, says Sam. There's even one in Liverpool and Manchester these days. And another link to the website. It's not just in South Korea, mate. We've got dog ones, sheep ones, raccoon ones and meerkat ones. Really? Oh, no, that is from South Korea. Well, I never. There's a great one in Nottingham, James. I recommend it if you ever come to the Midlands. They rescue strays and give them a home and safety, as well as providing an awesome niche place in the city. There's one in Manchester. Well, I never. Cat cafes. It's nice to discover something you previously knew nothing about. It's one of the things that keeps you fresh and young, isn't it? I think as you approach 50, which amazingly, judging by my youthful appearance, I am now doing, you realise that you have a choice. You can either turn into one of those people whose opinions haven't shifted in 30 years, or you can become even more open to newness and novelty and change, including the freedom and importance of changing your own mind. Cat cafes. Well, I never. Don't they smell a bit? They must reek. See, I've got 2 cats. Don't go all flipping catist on me, all right? I love my cats. And luckily they do their business in other people's gardens, so I don't have any problem with that at all. But if it was a cat cafe and they don't go out, you'd need to have about a football pitch-sized litter tray, wouldn't you? We digress. We're discussing important matters. We are not undertaking a tribute to an extremely talented gentleman I finally got to meet in person on Saturday, namely Alan Partridge, or rather Steve Coogan, the genius behind Alan Partridge. This is a genuine contemplation of the proliferation of cat cafes, but it's over now. Don't worry. 11:36 is the time. MMR. That was an astonishing call from Katie, who works in immunology and whose daughter plays routinely with a child of someone who doesn't think that children should be vaccinated. That's the kind of thing I'm looking for. Zach is in Islington. Zach, what made you pick up the phone?
This is actually the first time I've ever called into a radio show.
That's what we like.
This is you know,
You freak. What sort of a freak are you, Zach?
Topics to avoid when you're drinking is politics and religion. Well, for me, is vaccines, because I will go absolutely mental over it. I'm very passionate about this because I work as a paramedic for the London Ambulance Service.
Okay.
And I see this all the time. I see sick kids probably on a weekly basis.
With these diseases, with measles, mumps, or rubella, or other things that can be vaccinated against.
Things like that.
Yeah?
I've been vaccinated myself, and you have to. I mean, why not? You know, you'd take an umbrella if you knew a storm was coming. So, I mean, it makes sense.
So what do you do with a parent? I mean, you presumably as a paramedic, you can't start having arguments with concerned parents whose children are sick precisely because of their own idiocy is a bit strong, or ignorance, or whatever you want to call it.
That's the perfect word. I'd use something else, but I don't want to get banned off.
No, I hear you. So what do you do, though? Because you presumably just have to look after the children, get them to hospital, while privately wanting to give the parents' head a wobble.
Yeah. But I find I'm 30 myself, and I find with people in my generation are very much into their natural therapy, which is all well and fine. But, you have a mountain of evidence-based, peer-reviewed research pointing towards no correlation between autism and a vaccination,
No, you know that and I know that. But how do you interact ever with people who deny that simple truth?
Yeah, and you know what it is? It's like people have this I was listening to what Kate was saying. She probably hears this all the time. Big pharma's just out to make money. Like, do you know how cheap these vaccinations are?
Yeah, we're going off message a little bit here. I understand what you're saying, and the pharmaceutical companies could provide them at a lot more favourable rates to the herd, to the public. But I'm specifically interested today, Zach, and I know you've never done this before, so I hope you don't mind me giving you a steer. I'm specifically interested today in your interactions with so-called anti-vaxxers, or imbeciles, as I prefer to call them, perhaps unkindly.
Yeah, I have to bite my tongue, to be honest with you. It's just because, for one, I don't want to get fired, and
I know.
I'm paid to look after the kids.
And long may you continue to do so. If we ever meet over a pub table, I shall enjoy hearing your war stories. But I understand that you don't want to compromise your professional impartiality. Not impartiality, because you're not impartial. You're professional. But I kind of want to get to the nub of what it's like, as Kate has experienced in the most stark of terms, to be dealing with people who are endangering their own children's health while thinking that you're the one who's wrong. Cab's in Cambridge. Cab, what would you like to say?
Hello there.
Hello.
I wonder, James, do you remember back in 83, 84, 85, there was a similar scare we got regarding the whooping cough vaccine?
No, mate, I was too busy playing on my ZX Spectrum and riding my Piranha BMX, but tell me about it.
Well, I should have been playing on my ZX Spectrum and riding on my Rally Budgie. But next door, the kids weren't vaccinated against whooping cough because we had the same kind of scare.
Okay.
And across many of the council estates in the north of England especially, whooping cough became a real menace again.
Well, so a story got traction that what was the bad thing that would happen if you had the whooping cough vaccine?
Well, forgive me, I was 9, so I don't remember what the bad story was.
You've rung me up to tell me about it. You can't then say, forgive me, I don't know, but I believe you. I believe you up to this point. Go on.
Well, what I do remember about that was that I was immunised, but it still changed my life because the kids next door were coughing through paper-thin walls until they vomited night after night after night. I remember my mum having an argument with their mum over the garden fence about not immunising her kids. And the argument was something along the lines of how it was going to cause the kids harm, it was going to make them sick, and it was... And to me, what that did was it sent me to the library as a 10-year-old kid, and I started reading books on microbiology, and I started trying to get some understanding of it. And long story short, I ended up doing a degree in biology and then a PhD in microbiology, and I've done weird and wacky research and various things since then. And what depresses me about this is it's the same again. It's exactly the same argument. This will cause your kid some poorly specified harm, so I'm not going to immunise my kid. So I'm not going to save my kid from measles because measles is probably better than getting autism. Yes. And it's nonsense. We're in the same place now as we were in the early to mid 80s, And we haven't moved the whole public education.
Probably with more at stake, actually, when you read of 153 cases being confirmed in this county in New York State.
Well, what tends to happen is you might read that herd immunity to something like measles gone down from, say, 95% to 85%. That doesn't mean that 85% of people across a whole nation or a whole area are immunised. It means that you've got localised problems. You've got disparity there,
yes.
And it tends to hit an area very, very hard and very, very unpleasant.
Do you? I wonder whether you're the right person to ask about this, because you're a scientist. But do you have any charitable? I'd turn into David Bowie then. I don't know. Charitable insight into the minds of the parents, because I keep calling them imbeciles, and there's a little bit of me that feels a little bit ashamed of doing that, because these parents are acting out of what they consider to be their children's best interests. In many ways, they're the opposite of neglectful. They're not bad parents in the sense that we would traditionally describe bad parenting. They think that they're doing the right thing for their children, but we know, you and I, especially you, that they're wrong. Do you have any insights into how they can end up being so passionately wrong? And we're not talking about Brexit, for anyone who's just tuned in. We're talking about immunology. How can they end up being so passionately wrong?
It's quite funny that you've shown greater sympathy towards people who are wrong on Brexit than you have towards parents who are wrong on vaccines.
I've only been doing it for 20 minutes, Cap. Give me a break. My inner angel will emerge shortly. But I just said to you, that was me being sympathetic, saying I feel bad for calling them imbeciles. But do you have any understanding of their mindset?
You know, if you've gone to the library and you've read about a subject in depth...
Of course I do, yeah, like the Good Friday Agreement.
...experts, and you've read the research papers and something, and you think you're well informed, and then you're confronted with somebody who is apoplectic, screaming blue because they're afraid.
Yes.
They're frightened.
God, yes.
Reason doesn't counter fear, and that actually is another good parallel for breakfast. I don't think we can just berate parents and tell them they're wrong and you've got to immunise. The problem is lack of engagement on intellectual and scientific issues right from the outset. It starts from their own education.
I think you're right.
And from the fact that they're so willing to trust a fearmonger over...
Yeah, but again, you look at some of the people who were involved in disseminating this disastrous message, and I can, again, it's odd, actually. I know Brexit's kind of the lens through which everything gets corrupted at the moment, but it is about focusing upon the cheerleaders, isn't it? The people who spread the scare rather than the people who fell for it, and that's really, really hard to do.
Well, public health messages can be very, very effective. If you compare infection rates of something like HIV with Britain and the United States, it's taken a terrible and horrible toll of people here. But compared to other parts of the world, the public health message on HIV was very, very effective. And for at least a generation, people's habits rather started to change, and they started taking more care. I would suggest that with measles at this stage, we're at a similar point. We need a broad public education message rather than the occasional minister standing up on television and moaning about it.
Do you know what else you've made me think of, Cab? You've made me think that you and Katie, between you, it's never mission accomplished, is it? It's always a holding tactic. You can never... Because, like, she painted that horrible picture of, in order to alarm people, it has to come back. That's not good enough. Public health should be somehow finding a way to sound the alarm, even when it's fire prevention rather than fire extinguishing.
Yeah, it's an ongoing process, and it never ends.
Well, thank God for people like you. I was expecting...
I don't know what to say to that.
Oh, that's what I was expecting. Thank you very much, Cab. It's 11:45. Oh, you know me, I'm always one to encourage local news and young journalists on... Actually, I have no idea how old the journalist is, but a quick shout-out to Orlando Jenkinson of the Surrey Comet, who's done a sterling job on reporting some right old rascals in Esher and Walton, the constituency. Orlando Jenkinson in the Surrey Comet has done a sterling job on the activities of some right old rascals who've put up a big screen of Dominic Raab saying stuff in his own constituency. It's a nice little piece, that, Orlando. Thank you. Back to MMR and this slightly odd question. Always, as you know, at pains to find new ways into old topics because it keeps us all fresh and engaged. And I just wonder how you deal with or feel for, not just feel about, parents who have been successfully persuaded not to vaccinate their children, and therefore, according to science, increasing the likelihood of their children suffering terribly as a consequence of their own decision. I just want to say sorry to Catherine. Catherine sent me a long and detailed text about her son, and I think I remember talking to you quite a long time ago, Catherine. And I can't I get so much into the studio now that things disappear, but I did read it in its entirety, and I'm so sorry for you and your boy. And you'll allow me to say I hope he's very, very lucky to have a mum like you. In the bleak moments, just be kind to yourself. 11:51 is the time. Neil is in Shrewsbury in Shropshire. Neil, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
How are you?
Very well, thank you. What's on your mind?
Oh, dear. Right. I agree completely, pretty much with everything the previous callers have said. I work in infectious diseases.
Okay.
So I know about measles and whooping cough. And the problem is, well, not a problem, but my experience is you've got very small, hardcore conspiracy theorist anti-vaxxers. Can we just put those to one side?
Yes.
And then you've got a huge group of vaccine-hesitant people, parents, that because of all this information, misinformation, they haven't got a clue actually what to do. Now, the debate has become very toxic and polarised. And I'm going to stress something, and I don't know whether you agree with it or not, but if I was running the public health message, what I would say is this. These crazies over here aren't totally crazy.
Okay.
Vaccines, like every other medicine, yes, they have side effects. They have adverse reactions. Okay?
Yes, of course they do.
Right. But...
And there's also, there's quite a lot of work to be done, perhaps. One of the growth areas in this world is the relationship between the gut and mental health. That's something that I think is going to be huge in the coming years. But we digress slightly.
Last year, the University of Davis, California, actually published a paper that really showed for the first time there is quite a relationship between gut health and autism and other neurological conditions in terms of their presentation and severity. But as you say, that's digressing.
Conversation for a different day. So the people you're drawing that crucial distinction between what you call the hardcore and then simply the misled. The misled and the frightened.
Yeah. Now, if you, I've had conversations with vaccine-hesitant parents, and I tend to be brutally honest.
Yes.
And I will say, yes, there are these neurological conditions. There's meningitis that can result in a vaccination, but the rarity of that is incredibly low. Now, let's look at something like measles, right? A lot of these anti-vaxxers who do my head in will often say it's a mild disease, right? And in many cases, it is. But one little nugget of information which they don't tend to know is there's a complication of measles. It's called subacute pansclerosing encephalitis.
I'm sorry to hurry you. I know that you're being incredibly informative and helpful. Am I right in thinking that if I were to précis what you are saying and what you're about to say, it was that you need to fight fear with fear? So you need to fight false fear with real fear?
You fight fear with fact.
Yeah, that's what I mean, but the facts are frightening.
Yes.
Okay, I agree with you.
And it's a case of, your child may have a 1 in 3 million chance of developing a devastating adverse reaction to the MMR vaccine, okay? However, if they get measles, they've got a 1 in 10,000 of dying 10 years later, horrific brain disease. And
blindness and sundry other conditions as well, the odds would be lower. I hear you.
And you have to say, autism, no one really knows what causes autism. So it's so easy to kind of say, well, it could be them vaccines there. And it's addressing the fact that although no one knows what causes autism, you could, I don't know how many feet high the papers that show that that is not the case and that there is no link. And the problem you have is there are some papers that have said, there might be a link, and then when they've gone back and re-examined it years later or done a meta-analysis, it's like, we're wrong because of this.
I get it, and that's the challenge. And in fact, oddly, that's the challenge that faces so many areas of public discourse, in that it's a hobby horse of mine, the false equivalence given to evidence-based analysis and ill-informed opinion begins for me with MMR vaccines and climate change, leads inexorably to Trump and Brexit. But yeah, you're right. There's some real food for thought there. I'm moving on only because Sam is on the line, and I'm very keen to talk to her. Neil, thank you. Sam's in Crowborough. Sam, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi there.
Hello.
I have a 19-year-old son who is severely mentally and physically handicapped because he contracted whooping cough when he was 3.5 weeks old.
Oh.
So, and I regularly post his picture of him when he was in hospital, all tubed up and everything, on these anti-vaxxer threads on Facebook. And I regularly get told that I should have trusted in God.
Oh, so these are religious
always
types.
Makes me laugh. Well, they're the types that seem to pile onto these threads on Facebook. Yeah.
I mean, I say the word religious. They would describe themselves as religious. They seem to me to be working for the other side. Yeah,
exactly.
You presumably your lad contracted it as a result of contact with unvaccinated people. Is that right, or do we not know? Or,
yeah, I mean, how do you know, really?
Yeah.
How do you know? I mean, whooping cough is one of those things that you can get it later in life, even if you've been vaccinated, but you get it much more mildly. So, yeah, it's...
do you have... I mean, you're probably the wrong person to ask, but you do sound very nice, so I'm going to ask you.
I'm not normally, James. Normally I'm shouting and screaming at you from my car.
Nor am I, mate. Don't you worry. We'll call a temporary truce.
I'm not. I'm quite opinionated.
No, I'm sure you are, but I just wonder...
I do also see different sides of it, because my husband's a New Zealander, and we lived in New Zealand for a long time. And one of my friends, whose little girl was severely brain damaged, she was actually... It was a side effect of the vaccine, but it was an extremely rare complication.
A freakish complication.
And she said that she would still vaccinate her, and everything that comes up, like in New Zealand, you get a vaccine for everything, chicken pox, everything.
Yes.
She still vaccinated her daughter.
Do you have any insight into...
I can understand...
No, I can as well. I can as well. But in terms of the people who pile in on you and you just simply report facts on their Facebook feeds, do you have any kind of charitable insight into that mindset, or not?
No.
No, I'm not surprised, nor should you.
I mean, if they'd have been in the hospital and watched my son, because when your baby is that little, they can't actually hoop either, so they can't get the cough up. And he was drowning in his own secretions, basically,
of
and had to be ventilated and everything. And
that's herd immunity in a nutshell, isn't it? Is it the more people have it?
Exactly, and I think the message is that all of these people, yes, it's a scary thing to do. Everything that you give your child is scary. Every medicine you give your child can have a side
the irresponsibility then of somebody with a public platform whispering in your ear that you should do the thing that actually makes things even worse and more dangerous is beyond measure. I'm just glancing at the clock because we're going to cross live to PMQs, but it's in my gift, actually. I'll just keep an eye on things. So, Sam, I'd cut you off then in the middle of a butt, which is incredibly rude of me. What were you about to butt?
I can't remember what I was going to butt now. I think I was just going to butt that people are very selfish and they don't look outside.
That's a great point. No, but that's why I love the phrase herd immunity, because it reminds us all of our universality and our collective power. Whereas, of course, to opt out of the herd and endanger all of it through your own selfishness is probably what caused your boy's plight. Sam, thank you so much. Keeping an eye on Parliament, we will cross live to PMQs, probably wrongly. It was brilliant last week after I made a Herbert of myself, expressing reluctance to cross live. It was absolutely a humdinger, but we'll keep an eye on it, okay? I will cross live as soon as it's good. Jennifer, be conscious that I may have to cut you off in your prime, even though you're sharing with us a harrowing tale, so let me apologise in advance for that eventuality. What did you want to tell us?
Hi, James.
Hey, Jennifer.
I'm from Liverpool. I just wanted to tell you about my experience. I'm not as clever as anyone else that's been on.
Can you stop that right now, okay? No one's allowed to come on this programme and claim that they're not clever, okay? Carry on.
Well, I don't have as much knowledge about vaccinations and stuff, but this was my experience. I was getting a vaccination in high school for meningitis B. I remember it was new. Everyone was afraid. I was terrified of needles, so I really didn't want to get it, but I knew that the choice was either get it or I could possibly get meningitis and die. So
yes.
They basically held me down and gave me the vaccination.
Gosh.
I had friends that didn't get the vaccination. Their parents said that they didn't have to get it, so they refused.
Yes.
A few years later, I went to university, and one of my friends who sat next to me in class for a number of years, he went to bed on a Friday night feeling unwell, and basically died from meningitis B, and he wasn't found till the Monday when he didn't show up for class. He hadn't been vaccinated? No.
I don't know enough about that specific vaccination to say anything else, except I'm so sorry for what your loss, as it were, and that you went through that. Oh, gosh. And that's why I think it's the right decision, even though, in a sense, it makes better radio to let people come on and promote anti-vaccine positions. It endangers humans. So I'm pretty confident with my calculations on the moral compass of what is the right and the wrong thing to do. If only the voices that we're about to hear were possessed of moral compasses, we probably wouldn't be in the mess that we're now in. Ladies and gentlemen, the latest instalment in the weekly brouhaha that is PMQs.
And we know that 80% plus of the public are unhappy with the way in which this has been handled. Yep. This is not the fault of Guy Verhofstadt, Michel Barnier, Donald Tusk, or any MP in this House voting according to their conscience. That fault lies with the Prime Minister, who is the architect of the withdrawal deal. So can she finally concede to the House? She is liable, responsible, culpable for the chaos which is the Brexit debacle, and when she will be resigning. Prime Minister!
To the honourable gentleman. The Brexit deal delivers on the result of the referendum. Now, the honourable gentleman has a different view to me. I know he doesn't want to deliver on the result of the referendum. He wants to try and keep the United Kingdom in the European Union. 17.4 million people voted to take us out of the European Union, and that's what we're going to do.
Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. North West Leicestershire voted overwhelmingly to leave the European Union, and for the past 2 years, the Prime Minister has told my constituents on over 100 occasions that we'll be leaving on the 29th of March 2019 with or without a withdrawal agreement. At the last minute, she begs our EU masters for an extension to Article 50, delaying our departure. Does my right honourable friend realise that the good people of North West Leicestershire...
This is the man, of course, who believed until very recently that being English entitled him to an Irish passport. Talking about stupid people. I think irony just died.
Prime Minister.
But I hope that I hope the message he will take back to his constituents is a very simple one, which is we can indeed guarantee delivering on Brexit. We can guarantee delivering on Brexit if this week he and others in this House support the deal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This chaotic and incompetent government has driven our country into chaos. You know the scale of the crisis, Mr. Speaker, when the TUC and the CBI are united in writing to the Prime Minister saying that a plan B must be found to protect workers, the economy and the Irish border. My question on Monday went unanswered. So will the Prime Minister now say what is her plan B?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, as he knows, we are continuing to work to ensure that we can deliver Brexit for the British people and guarantee that we deliver Brexit for the British people. We have a deal which cancels our EU membership fee, which stops the EU making our laws, which gives us our own immigration policy, ends the common agricultural policy for good, ends the common fisheries policy for good. Other options don't do that. Other options would lead to delay, to uncertainty and risk never delivering Brexit.
Mr. Speaker, the only problem with the Prime Minister's answer is that her deal has been twice defeated in this House by, in one case, Mr. Speaker, the largest ever majority by which a government has lost a vote in our recorded parliamentary history. Reports today suggest that a former Conservative Prime Minister is telling Conservative MPs that pursuing a customs union with the EU is the best way of getting Brexit over the line. Does she agree with him, and will she be supporting any motions for a customs union this afternoon?
Prime Minister!
The Right Honourable Gentleman, what we have negotiated, the government's deal negotiated with the European Union, delivers the benefits of a customs union while enabling us to have an independent free trade policy, to negotiate free trade agreements in our interests and not rely on Brussels to negotiate them for him. He used to stand up for independent trade policy. Now he wants a customs union. Now he wants
Liam
to throw
Fox's
away the
former,
idea of an
I think,
independent
chief
trade policy
negotiator
and
in the
leave
Department for
Brussels
International Trade has said this week that anything we can negotiate will be worse than what we would have been party to as members of the European Union. She probably won't mention that.
She knows perfectly well that our policy is for a customs union in order to protect jobs, in order to protect society, and she will also know that the TUC and the CBI have called for a customs union as part of a deal. In fact, the letter wrote to all MPs yesterday saying a deal that delivers a customs union and strong alignment between the UK and the EU rules is the preferred outcome for the business community. So it's a bit strange when a Conservative Prime Minister says she doesn't want what the business community want. These are indeed strange times, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister say why she will not include a customs union in the options that will be discussed today?
Prime Minister!
The Right Honourable Gentleman, that he doesn't just read the question that he thought of previously, but actually listens to the answer that I gave to his previous question. And I will repeat it again, because the Right Honourable Gentleman stood on a platform to be able to do trade deals, to have an independent trade policy, and to deliver Brexit. His policy on customs union breaks the first promise. He's never explained why he wants to abandon an independent trade policy, and his policy on a second referendum breaks his second promise. Whatever happened to straight talking on his politics?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister doesn't seem to realise that she doesn't have a deal that's been supported by this House. And that our proposals for a customs union do give us alignment on workers' rights, consumer standards and environmental protections, and do not begin with a race to the bottom, which is what she and many on her front bench actually want. Earlier this week, Mr. Speaker, the Business Minister resigned from the government, saying the government's approach to Brexit was playing roulette with the lives and livelihoods of the vast majority of the people of this country. Why is she prepared to carry on risking jobs and industry in another attempt to yet again run down the clock and try to blackmail the MPs behind her into supporting a deal that's already been twice rejected?
Prime Minister!
Say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, we have been negotiating in order to protect jobs. What he says about a race to the bottom is wrong. As he well knows, we have been working across this House. It is absolutely clear in the political declaration that we agree to not falling back in workers' rights, but also we are a government that has enhanced workers' rights. The UK... The Labour Party can never stand it when they are told that Conservatives have stood up for workers, because that's what the Conservative Party does. We've enhanced workers' rights. We stand up for workers with our tax cuts, with our national living wage, and with higher employment.
I think that was a misspeak. It's still the Conservative Party, not the Conservative
Prime
Party.
Minister, she was unable to guarantee what's called dynamic alignment with European standards, and she knows full well that the Labour proposals are to use the EU standards as a baseline from which we would improve them, including giving workers full rights at work from day one of their employment and ending 0 hours contracts and many other things. In his resignation letter, Mr. Speaker, the Business Minister also said to the Prime Minister that he hoped she would now act in the national interest and enable Parliament this week to find a consensus negotiating position. If today or on Monday a consensus alternative plan emerges across the House, will the Prime Minister accept that decision of the House and accept it as the basis basis for the UK's negotiating position with the EU henceforward.
Prime Minister.
Well, gentlemen, the objective that we should all have is being able to guarantee. The objective we should all have is being able to deliver Brexit and guarantee delivering Brexit to the British people. And the right honourable gentleman stands there and asks me and raises this issue of workers' rights. We've been very clear about non-regression in relation to workers' rights and environmental standards. He shakes his head. It's in black and white in the political declaration that has been agreed. But we've also been clear. He ends his question, and I'm hearing the Shadow Trade Secretary is shouting from a sedentary position about the wishes, about listening to Parliament. What we are going to do on workers' rights is say that actually no, we won't simply accept automatically what the European Union does. We will listen to Parliament and give Parliament a say in that. I thought he wanted Parliament to have a say in these things.
We can, of course, constitutionally and politically already do
for regression
that
away from
as
those
members.
standards and damaging workers' rights. Mr. Speaker, after the two largest defeats ever in parliamentary history, surely the Prime Minister should be listening
That's not true. One of them was the fourth
largest. She didn't answer my
largest.
question about whether or not an agreement reached in this House would become the negotiating position of the government. I think the House, and perhaps more importantly, the whole country, deserves to know the answer to that question. Mr. Speaker, this country is on hold while the government is in complete paralysis. The vital issues facing our country, from the devastation of public services to homelessness to knife crime, have been neglected. The Prime Minister is failing to deliver Brexit because she can't build a consensus, is unable to compromise and unable to reunite the country. Instead, she's stoking further divisions. She is unable to resolve the central issues facing Britain today, and she is frankly unable to govern. The Prime Minister faces, Mr. Speaker, a very clear choice. The one endorsed by the country and many of her own party: either listen and change course or go. Which is it to be?
Prime Minister.
Can I just say, the right honourable gentleman raises the question of the indicative votes tonight. I actually answered that question in this House earlier this week. But he might want to talk to his shadow Brexit secretary, who's made clear that actually the Labour Party won't commit to supporting the result of any of the indicative votes tonight. And then he talks about what's happening in this country. Well, let's just look at what is going to be happening in this country next week. Nearly £1 billion extra for the police, £1.4 billion more available for local councils, £1.1 billion extra for our schools, another fuel duty freeze, another rise in national living wage, another tax cut. That's under the Conservatives. What would Labour give us? He wants to scrap Trident, he wants to pull out of NATO. Labour would give us capital flight, a run on the pound, a dropping living standards. The biggest threat to our standing in the world.
I think we will step out of the dream now and return to reality, not least so that Theo Ushwood has something to surprise us with when he joins us in half an hour to talk us through the highlights of PMQs. What a load of old rubbish, honestly. It really is beyond belief now, the fiddling as Rome burns from both sides of the House. This morning, just to avoid a cavalcade of criticism on social media, I think Theresa May considerably more culpable for the chaos, obviously, than Jeremy Corbyn is, although Jeremy Corbyn's Brexit spokesperson Barry Gardner contrived earlier this morning to make what should be a catastrophic day for the Conservative Party, or for Theresa May at least, into a problem day for the Labour Party. You really couldn't make it up. After the break, we're going to do something a bit odd. I, as you know, am privileged to be more exposed than almost anybody else to the truly unpleasant corners of racist social media. I'm something of a hero to those people. And that, before yesterday, was the only place I'd ever heard the phrase cultural Marxism. It is essentially a bat signal for racists. You find people queuing up on Twitter and elsewhere, kind of people who contact radio stations via texts and tweets or what have you, because they will never have the time to ring in. That's the only place I've ever seen it before. And what it means is I don't really know what the phrase means. People who use the phrase cultural Marxism have absolutely no idea what it means, except that somehow there's a secret plan to undermine Western culture and grr. So I've always taken it, to be honest, quite wryly. I've always thought anyone who uses the phrase is clearly bonkers and profoundly unpleasant. Not necessarily racist, of course. But the idea that Western culture is under attack from secret conspirators is, you know, that's like the lizards being in charge, isn't it? It's right up there. I'm not necessarily reviewing my position that anyone who uses the phrase is bonkers and punting some daft conspiracy about Western culture being under siege. But I am pointing out that a sitting MP used the phrase yesterday, which means, I don't know, perhaps you can't just point and laugh when it's in the mother of all parliaments. She didn't say it in Parliament. I speak of Suella Braverman, one of the contenders for most ignorant of European Union membership, despite being a prominent Brexiter award. She used the phrase. So, given that my experience is limited to sort of vile people on social media, even if they're even people, I'd like to talk to some real people about it. What does it mean? Why would the Jewish Board of Deputies urge her never to use this phrase again? It is, for me, just a far-right badge. But Suella Braverman obviously is from an ethnic minority herself, so the idea that it's white supremacism or racism is an odd one. Well, what is it? Cultural Marxism. It's the plan by which we try to take over and drive Western culture into a cul-de-sac. Is it? I just don't know. How bad is it that she used it? Do you think she knew what it meant? And what do you think it means? All of that after this.